Hello and welcome to the 101 Fantasy Football Show. My name is Sawyer and I am your host. This is episode 2 of the show. Last week was the first ever episode of the show and we covered my top 7 Dynasty rookie rankings, which were my tiers 1 and 2. Some really exciting prospects in there. If you want to hear me go talk about those guys, go check it out. This week the plan was to go through my next set of Dynasty rookie rankings, which would have been tiers 3 and 4. However, as a Dynasty owner myself, my baby, my very special team to me, the league that I care about most, we are having our rookie draft this weekend. So I decided I think it might be a little bit too much of insider information if I talk about my rookie rankings from 8 through 18 right before the draft. I do have pick 12 as well as pick 17 and 18, so I think I want to keep that stuff secret. So what I decided is that I'm going to push that off till next week. And we'll talk about something else today. There was something actually that was really fun and exciting that was announced in the NFL this week, and that was the schedule. So I'll do a little bit of a schedule reaction show. And as well, I'm going to go through what the show schedule is for the rest of the summer so that you guys know what my plan is, kind of what's going to be pumping out around what time of year and what to be looking forward to as well and watching out for. So let's jump into it. We'll jump into the show schedule first. Actually, wait, really quick. If you have any comments or questions, just make sure you drop them below, or you can tweet me at Sawyer_FF on Twitter. All right, so with that said, now let's jump into the show schedule. You'll see here on the screen, we still have to finish off my Dynasty rookie rankings. I'm super excited to finish those off. And so what we've done is I've decided I'm going to post those on Wednesdays. Wednesdays works best with my schedule to get uploads up. So Dynasty Rookie Rankings Part 2, which is tiers 3 and 4, that'll be up next Wednesday. That's May 20th. And then the following Wednesday, May 27th, I'll get my Dynasty Rookie Rankings Part 3 up, which will be tier 5, some of those guys in the back end of the second round, maybe some early third round guys, as well as some sleepers that I'm going to go over, just guys that I like in the late third, fourth, or even into the fifth round of your rookie drafts. When that's all done, I'm going to start breaking down teams. I've actually started doing individual team breakdowns, but I'll go through them all. We'll go through division by division, breaking down each team, going through my projections for those teams for the upcoming season, as well as I'm going to try to look at a 3-year window for each team so you get a sense of, just with contracts and everything that'll be going on with players, when teams can get out of player contracts, what the team might look like for year 1, 2, or 3 years down the road. And that just helps for trying to figure out opportunity for players, especially this year. You're looking at some rookies like Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb, and you're trying to figure out, based on the contracts around them and the players around them, how much opportunity are they really going to get in those first few years. So stuff like that we'll be covering with the individual team breakdowns. Should be a lot of fun, and we can get some projections for actual stat lines, which means that at the end of breaking down every team, I'll be able to jump into the next thing, which is going to be my 2020 Dynasty positional rankings with actual projections for players for the upcoming season. So that'll be super fun. It'll probably take June and July to get through all the individual team breakdowns and post videos for each division. So the Dynasty positional rankings will come out probably late July or early August. And then after that, to finish it off, to jump into the season for the back half of August, I'm going to do some mock drafts. I'm going to do a Dynasty startup, a redraft, one quarterback, a redraft superflex, maybe some other things too. If there's anything you guys want to hear, just let me know, because I might be able to sprinkle in some other things late August, maybe some buys or sells right before the season starts, but things like that. But for the most part, that's the schedule. The only things really set in stone are obviously the rookie rankings have dates, and then after that I do want to go through I want to go through all the things on the screen. However, there is some time that I'll have some weeks here and there where I'll be able to sprinkle in some other things. So if there's any ideas for shows you guys want to hear, please feel free to let me know. With that said, that's the show schedule for the summer. I do want to jump into the NFL schedule. So if you weren't paying attention, this week the NFL released its schedule. Now, transitioning year to year for fantasy, it's really hard to predict who the strong defenses and weak defenses will be because there's a lot of turnover each year. So what you're going to see in this, I'm going to do my best to predict. I went through every single team. I'm trying to predict who are going to be the strong defenses and weak defenses, the teams you're going to be wanting to attack in fantasy, the teams you're going to be wanting to avoid. However, I have focused specifically on the first few weeks, the teams that are going to start off strong with easy schedules, because by the end of the season, a lot of times it's really hard to predict who those weak defenses will be. You look at last year, it was Jacksonville and Carolina right at the end of the year, and I don't think going into the year anyone would have expected that, but it's just the turmoil of teams like Jacksonville, just where people want out. There's trades throughout the entire season. As well as injuries. There's just tons of injuries that are going to affect it. You know, a strong defense could have two big injuries, and all of a sudden they become a defense you're going to want to target. So I will take a sneak peek at the very end, talking about some of the playoff matchups and what looks promising for now. However, the real big takeaways we can take as fantasy football owners of the NFL schedule are the teams that are going to have good starts. And week one matters because, I don't know if you recall, but last year I think it was like Terry McLaurin, Marquise Brown, some other speedsters, maybe John Ross was in there. There were some guys who had big, or Sammy Watkins was there too, big first weeks. And then it felt like for the rest of those seasons, those guys carry more value because that is the first impression. All offseason, you're trying to project what these players are going to be. But in week one, if a player can have a big week, that's going to improve their value for the entirety of the season. It's crazy to think that way, but that's just how it seems to be in fantasy football. We kind of get this one lens of a player from week one, and we kind of pan it over for the entire season. So week one does matter. Those early starts to the season do matter. Then you're going to be able to maybe trade guys off for tons of value, maybe more value than they're worth, just because they had a light schedule. So these things are important, and it's also important to consider when you're looking at things like QB streamers or defenses, DSTs, stuff like that. You want to be targeting the ones with good early season schedules because a lot of the times you're not going to be rocking the same quarterback or same defense through the entirety of your season. So we'll jump into it now. Let's take a look at the run defenses. So the run defenses here I've gone through. On the left side you'll see friendly matchups. On the right side you'll see some hard matchups. So breaking these down, the weakest run defenses, I think the weakest one this year is going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars. Last year they were the second worst, only behind the Carolina Panthers, and they were averaging something north of 24 or 25 fantasy points per game to the running back, and I believe that is in standard scoring, so even more to the running back position for fantasy football if you're in a half PPR or full PPR. And then on top of that, this offseason they lose Calais Campbell, their best D lineman. Yes, Josh Allen is up and coming, and Yannick Ngakoue is there. However, I do think Yannick Ngakoue is not going to be there by the start of the season, or he's going to hold out and not play. And then Josh Allen will be just entering his second year, and if he's the only guy on the D-line, the offensive lines are going to be able to isolate him and create running lanes for their running backs. So I don't see a way where Jacksonville can really make a ton of improvement, and they were already brutal last year. Yes, Joe Schobert is in the picture now at middle linebacker, but I really don't think he's going to make enough of a difference to make up for the losses of Calais Campbell and Yannick Ngakoue. So for fantasy purposes, especially early in the year, I would be targeting Jacksonville defenses. I know Indianapolis plays them week one. That could be really exciting, and I think you could get a hit out of both Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack in that week, just because I think simply there's going to be high yards per carry against them all year long, potential for lots of touchdowns, and really just a great matchup for your running backs. The second weakest run defense, in my opinion, is Carolina. They were the worst last year by far, and I know they made some moves this summer. They did get Derek Brown as an interior D lineman, which should help. He was a top 10 pick in the draft, but they lose Kuechly. Kuechly's the captain of their defense. He's the man that runs everything on that defense. They're going to be running a new system. They're still a fairly young defense. So I do think their defense, although I don't think it will be as bad as 27 points per game to running backs, I think that's just ridiculous number of fantasy points to the running back allowed. I do think there's not going to be tons of improvement, and so this year fantasy owners are still going to be able to target the Panthers. And then on top of that, you'll see I have Houston, Detroit, and Miami. I do think they're one tier below. I would say if I had to put my chips down on two teams specifically that I think would be good matchups, it would be Jacksonville and Carolina. And then after that, I do think Houston, Detroit, and Miami, they're all bottom 10 last season. I don't think any of them make huge improvements. Houston loses DJ Reader. And then there's also some honorable mentions there. Cincinnati, who was the worst in yards given up, but they add Reader. So they're not as bad, but I still don't think Cincinnati is going to be a tough matchup. Cleveland, Green Bay, and even Kansas City. I think those are somewhat friendly matchups for teams. Kansas City, it might be risky because teams might be playing from behind, so although they might be able to run, they might have to pass. But those are the ones that I was looking at when going through the schedule and saying, okay, those are the friendlier matchups that we're going to be looking at. And then your hard matchups, you've got Tampa Bay, New England, San Francisco, New Orleans, Indy, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Philly. I honestly think, even though I have Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Philly in honorable mentions, these are all just brutal matchups. When you have running backs against these teams will not give up a lot in the run game. Tampa Bay was just amazing last season. New England, I think, was giving up 11 fantasy points per game to the running back position, which was the lowest in the NFL last year. San Fran, New Orleans, they're both solid defenses, especially their D lines. Indy adds DeForest Buckner as a D tackle, so he should be helpful, and they were already a stout defense. And then Baltimore and Pittsburgh and Philly, all, again, just very good run defenses. None of them gave up more than 15 points per game last year to a running back. So just very solid teams, and teams you're going to be wanting to avoid when it comes to playing your running backs. Then the pass defenses. The friendly matchups we have here are, first off, Miami. Miami was second worst last year against quarterbacks, second worst against wide receivers. I really didn't see them making any major improvements this offseason. Yes, I do think as a whole the defense will be a bit better. But I think you can still be targeting Miami as a defense, especially through the air. Then you're going to see Arizona. Last year they were the worst against quarterbacks. They were the worst against tight ends. I think it was honestly just ridiculous amounts that they were giving up to the tight end each week. I can't recall the exact number, but they were far and away the worst team against tight ends last year, and they were still bottom 10 versus wide receivers. So especially with your quarterbacks and tight ends, you can be targeting Arizona and your wide receivers as well. It's not a ridiculously hard matchup, even though there is Pat there. Then we're going to see Detroit is the third one. So they were already bad last year. Then they lose Slay. Yes, they drafted Okudah, but Okudah's a rookie. Slay is a dominant cover corner. So with Slay gone, I think you can still be attacking Detroit. Cincinnati I have next. Las Vegas. Las Vegas loses, or they're starting a very young secondary. They've got Arnett starting, Trayvon Mullen, and Jonathan Abram. All these guys are projected to be starters for their secondary, so maybe towards the end of the year they'll be a bit stronger, but at the start of the season especially, you can still be targeting Las Vegas. They were one of the worst teams last year. And then even honorable mentions, you'll see Jacksonville, Carolina, Atlanta, and Tampa Bay. Something that I think you all also want to be looking out for is teams that are able to keep pace. So that's why I think even teams like Atlanta and Tampa Bay aren't necessarily bad defenses. However, they're much more susceptible through the air than they are through the run game, and those teams can keep up offensively. So it's going to create more shootout games, and that's what you're looking for when you're looking for matchups that are positive for your quarterbacks and receivers and even tight ends. Then hard matchups, again, New England. They're just going to be a super stout defense. I think you look at last year, Pittsburgh was a complete debacle on offense, and they still were able to win games because they were just shutting down on defense. And I think that's kind of what you're going to get with New England this year. Their offense might be questionable. I'm not sure they're going to rely on their offense or Jarrett Stidham to get them a ton of points. And so their defense is just going to be like nightmares for teams to play against. So I do think New England is up there. Baltimore, Buffalo, San Francisco, the Chargers. I mean, the Chargers last year, they were already one of the more stout pass defenses, and now they have probably the best cornerback trio in the league. And then even honorable mentions, Pittsburgh, still a very good pass defense. The Rams and Green Bay, I think all those teams are hard matchups for your players who you're looking for in the pass game. So, with that, I want to show now some of the teams with some positive early season schedules. So taking a look at this chart here, I've got 4 specific teams laid out on the side. You'll see here first, Baltimore, the run game. The Baltimore run game should have a nice start to the season. So that could be Lamar Jackson, Mark Ingram, maybe even J.K. Dobbins gets in on this early. And you'll just see at home, they start off with Cleveland. Then they're at Houston. Again, just not a strong run defense. They go to Kansas City, who might be a little bit tougher, especially if Baltimore has to come back in that game. But I think Baltimore's offense is explosive enough. They showed it last year. I think, especially at home, that should be a close game, which means the run game will still have to be used. Washington was one of the worst last year. I do think they made their defense better this season, but I still think that's a pretty safe matchup. And then Cincinnati, again, one of the top teams that we're targeting with our run game. So Baltimore should have a nice five game stretch where Lamar Jackson, Mark Ingram, J.K. Dobbins could be getting some work in on the ground. The Chargers offense I have here next. They've got Cincinnati, KC, Carolina, and Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is red because they are a tougher team in the run game, so maybe in that game you're not looking for a pounder, but the Chargers don't really use a running back who's going to be more of a pounder. Maybe Josh Kelly is going to become that, and so that week you're not looking at anything for Josh Kelly, but for the most part, the running back you're using is Eckler, and this offense, as long as they have a quarterback who can figure it out, I think it'll be Taylor through this time. I think he can get the ball around enough to be good in these matchups. I think Cincinnati, that's one of the softer defenses in the league. Carolina, one of the softer defenses in the league. Kansas City, that should be a shootout. So even though they're not one of the softest, they're not one of the hardest defenses either, and that should be a game where the Chargers are chasing and are willing to air it out to try to keep pace. And the Buccaneers, a team you're going to have to pass against. And Eckler out of the backfield, he's a running back who won't get hurt too much by the matchups where he's going to have to run through and grind for yards, just because that's not the back he is. Then Carolina is on their next, but it's their pass game specifically. They've got Vegas, Tampa Bay, the Chargers, Arizona, and Atlanta. Obviously, the Chargers, I mentioned them as one of the strongest teams. However, the other four matchups are just very, very nice matchups for them. And so I do think, although one game in the middle of it isn't great, they should have a very good start to the season as long as Teddy Bridgewater fits this system, but I do believe he does. He has some familiarity with the new coaching staff already, so I do think Carolina is going to be able to move the ball around on offense, and they should give you some positive points early on in the season. And then New Orleans as well, as if you didn't need any more reason to start Michael Thomas. They've got Tampa Bay, Las Vegas, Green Bay, who is one of the tougher teams, but that is at home, and New Orleans at home. I think any defense can go in there, and New Orleans will still be able to get some yards through the air. And then Detroit as well, just another team where they're going to be able to attack them. Like, what are you going to do? Put Okudah on Michael Thomas? I think Okudah's a great prospect, but like they're just going to be able to feast through the air for all of those games. So super exciting for those four teams. At the bottom, you'll see I did have New England and Chicago. They do have plus schedules, but I just don't trust those offenses. If you're curious and you trust them, New England does have Miami, Seattle, and Las Vegas to start the year. Chicago has Detroit, the Giants, and Atlanta. Those are both pretty soft schedules, but I just don't think early in the season you're going to be able to trust either of these offenses until a quarterback emerges and shows some stability. All right, so let's talk about some early season losers. Just like I did with the winners, we've got a table laid out here as well. To start, the Denver run game might just be brutal. Like Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay, those are going to be some tough grinding games. Those tough sledding. They've got Tennessee, a very solid run defense. Pittsburgh is really good. Tampa Bay, one of the best in the league. I think they might be the best this season. The New York Jets, very, very solid still, even though they weren't listed. They were one of the lowest fantasy points per game to the running back last season. And New England in New England at Foxborough is just going to be another really hard game. So if you're looking to draft a Denver running back, I would tell you don't, and just try to trade for them after week 5, after they've had a really, really tough first 5 games. The schedule does lighten up a bit after that. Then Houston's offense is second on the list. They've got Kansas City in Kansas City. Not a crazy hard game, but just after that it becomes a bit of a nightmare with Baltimore at Pittsburgh and Minnesota. I think all those defenses are very good. Kansas City is middle of the road, but for the most part that's still a very tough schedule to start the season. And that Kansas City game is a Thursday night in Kansas City primetime game. So I don't expect tons from the Houston offense to start the season, especially as Deshaun Watson's trying to figure out who he's going to rely on without DeAndre Hopkins in the offense. Then the Giants offense is third. Just a bit of a nightmare of a schedule again. Just Pittsburgh, Chicago, in Chicago, San Fran, and then at LA. Just San Fran and Pitt, two of the strongest defenses. And then Chicago and LA Rams are very, very strong themselves. Maybe not the best ones in the league, but those are both road games as well. I was really excited about the potential for Daniel Jones and some of these pieces in the offense, but this start of the season is going to be brutal for them. And then finally, the New York Jets. They're at Buffalo versus San Fran and at Indianapolis. Some really tough games in there. at Buffalo to start the season should be very tough, especially with Sam Darnold not really having any receiving weapons, and Buffalo being a very stout run D. That's going to be tough for them. Then San Francisco, again, like I've said many a time, San Fran is one of the top defenses in the league. And then Indianapolis, who just improved their D-line. They're not going to be able to run. And at that point, who are they going to pass to? It's really hard to find weapons for Darnold there. I like Mims as a prospect. I like Crowder as a slot guy, but, is it Perriman? Is he really going to become their alpha? I just don't think so. So I think for them it's going to be a really rough start to the year. All right, and with those things done, we'll take a sneak peek at the playoffs. Like I said before, I want to preface this by saying we have no idea what these defenses will actually look like by this time of year. But as you'll see under the friendly matchups, just like some guys you're already going to be playing, just even more reason to have them in your lineups. Lamar Jackson, Cleveland, Jacksonville, and the Giants in Week 16. That's just such a light schedule for him. That whole Baltimore offense, you're going to want some of them come playoff time. Green Bay, something for Aaron Rodgers to finally be happy about come playoff season. I feel like last year we were saying Green Bay, you don't want to have Aaron Rodgers for the playoffs, and I feel like the last few years it's been like that. And then obviously this offseason, just things did not go his way. But he should have a good end to the season. Green Bay should be still competing for a playoff spot at that point. And so they'll be playing hard against Detroit, Carolina, and Tennessee. All pretty good matchups. Tennessee maybe a bit less, but Detroit and Carolina for sure games you want to be targeting. Then the Bucs, Tampa Bay, Tom Brady and that offense, they get Minnesota, which is a bit of a tougher matchup, but then Atlanta and Detroit in Week 15 and 16. Just very nice matchups for them. They should be able to carve up some of those defenses, especially through the air. So your Mike Evans and Chris Godwin shares should be nice for you come playoff time. And finally, Derrick Henry, as if giving him Jacksonville in the playoffs is fair. Week 14, your first playoff matchup, Derrick Henry should romp the Jags. And then Detroit and Green Bay. Detroit, again, another fairly light run defense. Green Bay a bit more solid, but still, as a whole, just a great playoff schedule for Derrick Henry. And it was actually hard to find some harder playoff schedules, which is nice. That's what we want to see. We don't want to have a lot of assets with tough playoff schedules where you're not going to be able to use them. And like I said, this will change, so maybe there are more out there. But for now, Buffalo has a rough playoff schedule. They've got Pittsburgh, Denver, and New England. And Minnesota, they've got Tampa Bay, Chicago, and New Orleans. So both teams are in a bit tough, but we'll see by the end of the year if that's still the story. And with that said, I know it was a short episode, but I want to say thank you for tuning in. Come back next week, because next week I'm going to break down some more of the rookie rankings, which is the bulk of what I want to be doing right now. It's rookie season. People are excited. The fever's here. And so make sure you tune in to hear my next rankings. If you have a comment or another opinion or question for me, you can comment it below, or you can tweet me at Sawyer_FF. And have a great day. Thank you guys for tuning in.